Alright, welcome to the F3 video. Our goal for F3 is to use function characteristics to graph a function. I'm going to highlight this function characteristics business. Each function has its own specific type of characteristics, and some characteristics are the same for every function ever. So as we go through this, I'm going to make sure I really decipher which characteristics are good for every function and which characteristics are good for just the linear functions. So the very first characteristic that I'm going to take a look at is the y-intercept. And the y-intercept, this is a characteristic of every function that you're ever going to come across. So every function will have a y-intercept. Actually, I'm going to take that back. There are some special cases that they don't have a y-intercept, but I will say 99.9% of functions will have a y-intercept. We're going to take a look at a couple of special cases throughout the semester where we don't have a y-intercept, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. A y-intercept is a point in which the graph crosses the y-axis. And as you know, so we have the x and y axes. So you know, if we had some line here, we know that the point, here's the y-axis, so that point would be right here. And what's really neat about this point is that regardless of where it is along the y-axis, the x value is always the same. Right? So here we could say that the x value is always going to be 0. So the y-intercept, the point for the y-intercept is always going to be in the form of 0, some number. Now, since we're dealing with linear functions in this instance, that point for linear functions is always going to be the value b. So let's take a look at, so when we look at linear functions, we have f of x equals mx plus b. Right? That's this b right here. This b value right here is this same b value here, and what it looks like on the graph is the point where it crosses that y-axis. Right? Now the second characteristic that we're going to take a look at is specific to just linear functions, and that is this m business, m right here. So what we're going to look at is slope. All right, slope is you're going to hear thousands of descriptions for slope as time goes on, but I want to write slope as simply the change in y divided by the change in x. I don't know why I put a period there. Don't worry about that. All right, so slope, it's the change in y over the change in x. This is a fraction. And it's actually a good thing when it's a fraction. Now, whenever we're dealing with slope, again, m is your slope. Right? So this m, that m is your slope. The best way I like to think about it, slope, is you have rise over run, right? Where rise is the up and down, run is the left and right. Now, as I'm graphing, since our goal today is to graph, since our goal today is to graph, I'm going to give you a little jingle that I was given when I was learning how to graph these, and it really helps me out. So whether things are positive or negative, I'm going to rise with the sine. Man, my typos are pretty terrible today. Rise with the sine and run to the right. So we're going to rise with the sine and run to the right. So let's take a look. How can we graph if all we're given is a y-intercept and a slope? Alright, so when I have a y-intercept and a slope, our first example that we're going to take a look at. The first example that we're going to take a look at is this guy here, where I have a y-intercept of 2 and a slope of -1/3. So on my graph, here's my y-axis. I know you're probably going to have to pause the video and create your graph, your coordinates, but after you're done pausing your video, we're going to go ahead and plot. So the first step we're going to do is we're going to plot the y-intercept, and then the second thing we're going to do is we're going to count the slope. I'm going to show you that on a couple of different times here. So plot the y-intercept. The y-intercept here is 2, so along the y-axis I'm going to go to +2. Here's 0, 0, so up 1, 2, and here I am. Now, from that point, not from 0, 0, but from that point, I am going to count the slope. So I'm going to put a little note here. Count slope from the y-intercept point. All right, so here's my y-intercept. I'm going to count my slope. Again, rise with the sine and run to the right. Well, here my sine is negative. So -1, is that going to go up or is it going to go down? Well, negative implies that I'm going to go down. So I'm going to go down 1, and I always run to the right. So I'm going to run to the right 3 units. So I'm going to go down 1 and run to the right 3 units. And here I am. Once I have those 2 points, then I can draw my line. If you need a ruler, always ask. In general, you could use your student ID, but when we draw straight lines, try and draw an actual straight line. Alright, let's take a look at our second example here. Something really interesting happens here on our second example. My y-intercept is 0, right? So I need to go to 0 along the y-axis, and here you are, right there. And now my slope. Well, my slope is a whole number. I don't have a fraction right now. I have a number. Well, how am I going to turn a whole number, like -4, how am I going to turn that into a fraction? Because I need to know what's my rise and what's my run. With rise over run, I need a fraction, and this is clearly not a fraction. So I'm going to turn -4 into a fraction by saying -4 over 1. And now I can count my slope. So I'm going to go down 4 units because it's negative and I rise with the sign. And then I'm going to go to the right 1 unit. So down 1, 2, 3, 4, and to the right 1. Again, rise with the sign, run to the right. And now I can graph that line. Okay. Now, it's not always going to be given to us that we are handed a y-intercept and given a slope and it's so easy to plot and go. So I want to make sure that we're really, really smart about this part. So the next thing I want to do, I want to say, so how can I find the y-intercept and slope from a function? Alright, so the function that we're looking at is f of x equals mx plus b. Well, as we've seen, here is my y-intercept. So the number by itself is the y-intercept, and m, the number in front of x, not x, but the number in front of x, this is my slope. So I'm going to do one quick example of what to do whenever I have a function. So here, my next example. So the first thing I want to do is determine the y-intercept. Well, the y-intercept, as we saw just a second ago, is the b value by itself. So here it's going to be -3. So the y-intercept is -3. I go down 1, 2, 3 along the y-axis. My slope here is 2, and I want to turn that into a fraction. Let me 2 over 1. I rise with the sign, and it's positive, so I'm going to go up 1, 2, and run to the right 1 unit. Now I can draw my line.